The development of the line of English setters known as Old Hemlock took years in the making. This line was the work of a man with an artist's eye and knowledge gained through years of gunning over his and his family's English setters. The legacy of the man, George Bird Evans, and his wife Kay, still runs through the Old Hemlock setters today. George Bird Evans lived a life that most could only dream of, filled with art, music, the West Virginia mountains, true love, and splendid setters. George was born in Uniontown, Pennsylvania on December 28, 1906, and with a father that was an avid bird hunter and owned and shot over English setters, George was destined to have English setters in his life as well. George's father gave him his first shotgun, a Fox Sterlingworth 20 gauge, for Christmas shortly before he turned 13 years old. And in the following years, George accompanied his father behind the setters. At that time, they were mostly focusing on bobwhite quail in the foothills of southwestern Pennsylvania, but occasionally they sought out ruffed grouse in the mountains on Chestnut Ridge. As George matured, his love for the Allegheny Mountains, setters, and ruffed grouse grew stronger. It consumed him and became an obsession that would form his destiny. Kay Harris, originally from Harrisonburg, Virginia, became his other obsession. She soon came to share his passion for the mountains and the sense of adventure that they contained, and became George's other true love, a love that would last their entire adult lives. They were married on January 8, 1931, and moved to New York to pursue George's career as an illustrator. After working as a freelance artist for several years perfecting his technique, George was offered a contract to work exclusively for Cosmopolitan magazine in 1938. This gave them the resources to begin saving funds to purchase an historic farm with a hewn log home that had been built in 1782. It was located near Brewston Mills in Preston County, West Virginia. In 1939, the farm they had set their sights on was to be sold at public auction. George and Kay were unable to leave New York for the auction, so George's father successfully bid for them. They christened it Old Hemlock, in honor of the virgin hemlock trees located on the property. It was here that George developed the famous line of setters registered under the same name. George set out to breed a setter to suit his own taste, a setter that would harbor the natural ability to handle ruffed grouse, while possessing some of the beauty George believed to have been lost in the field trial dogs of the era. In 1939, his search for a foundation dog led him to George Ryman's kennels, where he found Blue. Blue was a blue Belton that carried a unique combination of Llewellyn blood and Mr. Ryman's own Sir Roger de Coverley breeding. In 1942, Dawn, an orange Belton female, was acquired as a mate for Blue, contributing a mixture of English dual bench and field blood. World War II postponed the mating, but George's plans came to fruition in 1947, when Blue and Dawn produced the first litter of Old Hemlock puppies. George chose to keep an orange Belton male he named Old Hemlock Ruff. As George said in his book, The Upland Shooting Life, it was Ruff who shaped our Old Hemlock line. George maintained a high standard for his breeding program. This assured the setters he bred had the traits that would continue his quest for his ideal of the ultimate grouse and woodcock dog. Ruff proved himself on grouse and developed into the type of dog that George had set out to create. Seeking to capture Ruff's traits going forward through line breeding, George first chose to breed Ruff to a female of bench lineage named Wilda of Blue Bar. There would be 2 matings between them, one in 1952 and a second in 1953. George kept 1 male from each of Wilda's litters, an orange Belton Old Hemlock Feathers from the first, and a blue Belton Old Hemlock Shadows from the second. Wilda had contributed the beauty George sought, but neither excelled on grouse as Ruff had. For that reason, he chose not to outcross to a setter of pure bench lineage again. Looking to build on the natural hunting ability Ruff possessed, George circled back to Ryman's breeding in choosing Ruff's next mate, Ryman's Blue Heather. She carried Sport's peerless blood that George Ryman had introduced into his kennel the decade prior. In 1958, the 4th Old Hemlock litter was born. George kept the only female and named her Old Hemlock Dixie. Dixie matured into an excellent grouse dog. In an early 1964, she whelped a litter sired by Old Hemlock Shell. Dixie's litter produced 3 puppies, one of which became Old Hemlock Bliss. Having Ruff as her double grandsire, Bliss was proof that George's plans had been well laid. George would write in the Upland Shooting Life that it was like Ruff coming back to me. George and Kay abruptly lost Bliss in 1969 when she did not recover from the spay surgery she had in an effort to combat mammary tumors she had developed in the months prior. With the loss of Bliss, George's plans were interrupted, and the Old Hemlock line was suddenly in peril. A friend of George and Kay had bred Old Hemlock Mark, a littermate of Bliss, to Ryman's Miss Blue, and from that litter George received Old Hemlock Briar. In his book, An Affair with Grouse, George wrote that Briar was so like Ruff with his orange Belton beauty, his intense birdiness and perception, he seemed to bring Ruff back in living flesh. Briar sired 12 litters from 1972 to 1978, ensuring that the Old Hemlock bloodline would never be in jeopardy again. During George and Kay's lifetime, there was also Briar's son, Belton, and then Quest, Manton, and Bacchus, all line bred to Ruff. George had begun writing magazine articles about his experiences as early as 1956. He also began writing upland gunning books, with the first being The Upland Shooting Life, which was published in 1971, that drew from his journals and years of hunting experience in search of grouse and woodcock in the Allegheny Mountains. George wrote 19 upland shooting books, many of which were based on his shooting journals, and over 100 magazine articles, as well as book introductions and other pieces. Exciting his readers with descriptions of his shooting experiences and life at Old Hemlock, George had a loyal following that continues to this day. In his book, Troubles with Bird Dogs, he discussed the subject of breeding and bloodlines. George wrote, "It is pleasant to hope that when Kay and I are no longer gunning, Old Hemlock setters will keep our ideals alive." George and Kay left a legacy in the Old Hemlock line of English setters, and their ideals remain as vibrant today as they were in the beginning.
Hello, I'm Roger Brown, the current owner of the Old Hemlock line of English setters. I'd like to talk to you today about our mission of keeping the Old Hemlock line of English setters alive for generations to come. And what better place to discuss this than the grounds of Old Hemlock. In 1971, I was looking for a setter and contacted George and Kay Evans about the availability of a pup. We exchanged letters and talked on the phone, and after several conversations, I was put on the waiting list for one of Old Hemlock Briar's puppies. In 1973, I received a phone call from Kay Evans telling me that she had a puppy available for me. That puppy became Old Hemlock Amber. Since that time, I've had 11 Old Hemlock setters, including my current 4. Over the next few years, I became friends with George and Kay and made many trips to Old Hemlock to visit and talk about dogs. George and I both liked a dog type that hunted with fire and drive, hunting to the extent of the bell and checking back with the gunner. I followed each breeding George did carefully, and as a result of George liking my female setters, I raised litters as well. George liked how I raised those litters and how my dogs were part of my family, and years later asked if I had any interest in someday taking over the Old Hemlock line of setters. I said yes. We had candid discussions, and I found that you could disagree with George and still be his friend. Through our conversation, he realized that we liked the same kind of dog. George admired the fact that I followed each breeding and knew the dogs well. He told me every breeder puts his mark on a line. On May 5th, 1998, on George's passing, I took over the line and placed the last litter of puppies that George had bred. Heeding Kay's suggestion that I have a sounding board, I needed to select someone to help me carry on the line. I selected Jeff Kaufman. Jeff and I carry on the line and followed the same breeding practices that George and Kay did, registering the dogs in the Field Dog Stud Book maintained by the American Field. Because we do not keep a kennel of brood bitches, this joint ownership approach is necessary to allow us to control which dogs we use in our breeding program to carry on the Old Hemlock prefix. Our setters are typically Belton dogs, being either orange or blue in color. We occasionally have puppies displaying solid markings or tricolor patterns. As with all types of dogs, the size will vary. The male Old Hemlock setters run between 55 and 65 pounds, females between 45 and 55 pounds. We OFA certify all of our dogs for both hips and elbows. Rather than the dogs living in a kennel, they are companion hunting dogs that live with their families, hunting all over the United States and proven on various game birds. This gives us the advantage of selecting the type and kind of dog we want and like, as well as the dogs living as we prefer, getting the individual attention dogs deserve. Many of these owners are friends who have vast knowledge of grouse and woodcock hunting and whose opinions I value and appreciate when selecting dogs to use in our program.
The Old Hemlock family means to me and my wife a great deal from the standpoint of It's a friend type thing. I mean, we're not just acquaintances, we've become friends. I've been invited up north to hunt with Bob Rose, Bob and Candace Tuttle. I look forward to this trip as much as any vacation I take during the year. It's the upland shooting life. It's the whole package still that I love. The dog's the most important part. If I never pull a trigger, if I see him point, I see him retrieve, or just out there hunting, I get the greatest thrills. The whole group, I think, shares pretty much that same philosophy, and that's why I like hanging with people like that.
You know, for most of us, our success at the end of the day is the dog's success. We don't measure our success by the number of dead things that are on the ground. We measure our success by the number of points that the dog has and the retrieves and the pleasure that the dog gives us. And that's what makes our day, and that's what we're doing out here. It's all about the dog.
What makes Old Hemlock stand out to me is the combination of beauty and hunting ability. There are a lot of great bird dogs out there, all kinds of breeds, but I don't think there's anything as beautiful as an Old Hemlock setter.
One thing that sets the Old Hemlock setters apart, to me, in most cases, is their physical appearance, okay? And I suspect when I read George's book, the first book I remember getting of his, that was what drew me to them, is their physical appearance. After that, they're very intelligent dogs. They all are. They just seem to be a notch above some of the other lines of English setters that I've been around.
I chose Old Hemlock setters basically because once you meet them, you know there's no others. I like the setter style over some of the other hunting breeds. The personality is there. They're family dogs as well as hunting dogs, and they just have the whole package.
First and foremost, it's about the dogs to me. I love coming up and seeing how all the litters have progressed, not the ones that are from my litter, my dogs from the various litters, but what's been happening around the country and in New England and down south with the dogs and how they're progressing. These 3 dogs are all out of the same litter, and this will be a good way to judge how they've all progressed and kind of turned out after. They'll all be 6 this May.
The Old Hemlock setters are such family dogs. They're so loving. They can be a little headstrong sometimes, but you'll never find a more loving, family-oriented dog. And they are amazing in the field. They really are. It's just been truly a joy to watch them work.
I think that what makes it better is it's not only a companion, but it's an excellent bird dog, and it will retrieve to hand, and it will find birds when other dogs can't.
A lot of the dogs, they get them at, just 8 weeks old, and they'll point early. These dogs here will point birds very, very early.
These dogs are consistently a very nice companion dog and a great walking hunting dog as well, that they handle well. They're easier to train. A lot of people like pointers for that reason, but this dog, I think, distinguishes itself because the Old Hemlock line was developed to produce a biddable, great companion, but great hunting dog. A dog that instinctively, because of the genetics, hunts well, understands retrieving instinctively. We haven't yet trained a dog to retrieve. He just does it. We haven't yet trained a dog to honor the other dog's point. He just does it. That's genetics that delivers that kind of dog over and over again. So when George Evans put this line together a long time ago, he saw those characteristics and kept breeding those into the line closer and closer, and we can maintain that today. It's just fantastic because it's a great dog to have around. It's a great dog to hunt with.
Well, this group is really my second family. Obviously your immediate family comes first, but These folks have welcomed me in. It's really been a real high point in my life to be associated with them, to know George and Kay, and to carry on their traditions through this reunion and some of the other things that we do.
The old Hemlock family is a group of people that have similar interests, both not only as a companion but also in the field, and a desire to see the breed grow as time goes on.
It's pretty neat to have a group of people that all have the same dog, which is pretty neat to begin with. But to have that, and then they understand that breeding and they understand the history of the dog, and they're committed to keeping that history and keeping the training and keeping the dogs active and hunting, and we want to keep that tradition going.
The final breeding decisions are mine, not breeding by committee, but friends whose opinions I value and trust. We are finally at a place where we can use line breeding to fix characteristics in our line. The last few litters have been line bred to Old Hemlock True, a son of Manton. These litters have produced outstanding dogs that develop early with the natural instincts we want.
Good boy, what a good tree. Okay.
We will use line breeding to fix our characteristics that we want in our line, and outcrosses when necessary to keep our line vibrant. As many of us who hunt and have bird dogs age, we at the Old Hemlock Setter line are looking to the future and the next person who will continue to carry on this special and historic English Setter breed. I have confidence in the future of the Old Hemlock Setters. I plan to continue the tradition of the Old Hemlock line, and as George Bird Evans did, will put my own mark on it as any breeder would.
The Old Hemlock Foundation is a separate educational nonprofit created by George Bird Evans and Kay Evans for the purpose of preserving their home and surrounding acreage, while also benefiting local organizations through charitable grants and scholarships. If you are interested in obtaining an Old Hemlock English Setter, please feel free to contact Roger Brown for information about upcoming litters. Additionally, if you would like to learn more about George Bird Evans and Kay Evans, their writings, and their home here at Old Hemlock, I encourage you to contact Lee J. Graffius, Administrator of the Old Hemlock Foundation. The mission of the Old Hemlock Foundation is to preserve and promote the legacy of George Bird Evans and Kay Evans.